It was supposed to be just another ride. The subway car hummed under fluorescent lights, nearly half empty, the kind of ride where nobody bothered anyone. Andre Miller sat near the door, headphones slack around his neck, a brown grocery bag resting between his boots. That's when she marched in, blonde hair tied tight, a rainbow pin on her lapel, and a face twisted in manufactured outrage. Heather Grant. She stopped right in front of him, arms crossed like a barricade. "You need to move," she said sharply, loud enough for others to hear. Andre blinked slowly, then glanced around. Rows of empty seats. Dozens of places she could sit. Still, somehow he was the problem. "I'm good here," he replied, calm, almost soft. Heather's voice sharpened. "You don't get to oppress women. You standing your ground is violence. As a lesbian and a feminist, I demand you move." Eyes turned. People shifted in their seats. But nobody intervened. Not yet. Andre stayed still, expression unreadable. No anger. No defensiveness. Just a presence. Solid. And then a voice from the back. "Lady, maybe the seat you need isn't on this train." A ripple of laughter broke across the car. Phones were already recording. Heather's face cracked, disbelief giving way to humiliation. And Andre, he leaned back, slid his headphones on, and disappeared into his music. Some battles aren't about justice. They're about ego. And some egos pick the wrong quiet man to fight. Ever seen someone stand taller just by staying still? Or watched silence carry more weight than shouting? Drop a comment if you've witnessed it or lived it. Like if you know quiet power is still power. Share this, because sometimes the real victory is staying seated. Morning in the city always had a certain heaviness to it, a kind of sleepy tension that pressed down long before the first meetings, the first deadlines, the first missed trains. Andre Miller moved through it the way a stone moves through a river, steady, untouched. A man in no hurry. A man who had learned a long time ago that rushing never changed anything worth changing. His mornings were simple, deliberate. Wake before the alarm. Black coffee, no sugar. A quick stretch by the cracked kitchen window, watching the early sun wrestle the gray out of the sky. He lived in a modest apartment above a grocery store, the kind with creaky floors and pipes that groaned when you took a hot shower too long. Not much furniture. Not much need. A faded blue couch. A sturdy kitchen table. 3 neatly folded shirts, always stacked in the same drawer. Order wasn't just comfort for Andre, it was survival. A way to carry dignity when the world offered none. Most days he worked 2 jobs, warehouse supervisor by night, security guard at a local museum by day. Neither job paid for luxury, but it paid enough. Enough to keep the lights on. Enough to send a little to his mother back in Georgia every month. Enough to stand on his own, no matter who decided they had the right to look down on him. The city didn't see men like Andre. It rushed past them, used them, forgot them, until it needed them. Hold this, guard that, stay silent, smile politely. And Andre, he had long ago stopped expecting gratitude. Respect, he knew, wasn't something you could demand. It had to be carried, worn like a second skin. That morning, after a long overnight shift hauling crates at the warehouse, he didn't look like a man anyone would notice. Steel-toed boots dusty with gravel. Hands rough and calloused. Eyes tired but sharp. He swung by the corner store for groceries. Bread, beans, rice, the essentials. Nodded politely to the cashier, who barely lifted his eyes from his phone. Outside, the wind had teeth. Andre pulled his jacket tighter, adjusted the strap of his bag across his chest, and headed toward the subway entrance. Another ride. Another day. He didn't know it yet, but someone would try him that day. Someone would look at him, at the quiet strength, the calm endurance, and mistake it for weakness. They always did. Inside the train station, life moved like a lazy river, slow streams of people drifting toward their platforms. Andre tapped his Metro card, passed through the turnstile, and walked down the long, grimy stairs to the platform. He always stood at the far end, near the front of the train, where it was less crowded. Old habit. Harder to get cornered there. Easier to see who's coming. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. When the train arrived, he stepped inside and found his usual place, a seat near the door, easy to exit if needed. He set his grocery bag carefully between his boots and rested his elbows on his knees, head bowed slightly. Not defeated, just conserving energy, like a man who knew the weight of the world and how to carry it without complaint. 2 stops later, it happened. It always happened when you least expected it, some small, absurd moment where the lines of decency blurred. A commotion at the far end of the car. Raised voices. Heavy steps approaching. Andre didn't lift his head. Not yet. He heard her before he saw her. You think you're entitled to everything. Every damn thing. A woman's voice. Shrill, sharp, shaking with performative outrage. Andre looked up just in time to see her, Heather Grant, storm down the aisle. She wasn't looking for seat. She was looking for a target. And somehow, even with all the empty chairs around, her eyes locked on him. Like they always did. She stood in front of him, arms crossed tightly across her chest, mouth curled into a hard, self-righteous sneer. "You need to move," she barked. Andre blinked once. Slowly, took in the empty seats to his left, to his right, across the aisle. Plenty of space. No shortage of options. He looked back up at her, not hostile, not apologetic, just steady. "I'm good here," he said quietly. It was the kind of answer that left no room for argument, but of course, she argued anyway. "You don't get it, do you?" She snapped, her voice rising in volume and pitch. "You standing your ground is violence. As a lesbian and a feminist, I have the right to feel safe, and you're making me feel unsafe." Andre didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't roll his eyes or scoff. He simply stared at her, a gaze as immovable as stone. Heather faltered. Just a flicker. Barely noticeable, but it was there. That moment when she realized she wasn't winning. Around them, the train car shifted. Some passengers pretended to scroll their phones. Others stole glances, eyes flickering between Andre and Heather, calculating the scene. No one spoke. Not yet. Andre adjusted the strap on his shoulder bag, leaned back slightly against the plastic seat. A posture so casual, it was almost daring. Heather's nostrils flared. "People like you think you can just sit wherever you want and intimidate whoever you want," she hissed. Andre almost smiled. Almost. Because he knew something she didn't. People like her didn't want safety. They wanted control. And control, he had learned, was something you only surrendered if you believed you were powerless. Andre didn't feel powerless. Not today. Not ever again. From somewhere down the train, a voice finally broke the silence. A man, casual, almost lazy in his delivery. "Plenty of empty seats, lady. Maybe try one that doesn't come with a whole speech." A few passengers chuckled, soft at first, then louder. Heather whipped her head around, scandalized, realizing for the first time she wasn't winning the crowd. She turned back to Andre, searching for an ally, for sympathy, for some last ounce of control. Andre simply put his headphones back on. The soft click of the music starting was louder than any words he could have said. Heather's mouth opened, then closed, her face flushed deep red. And in that moment, Andre wasn't a target. He wasn't a symbol. He was just a man, refusing to be moved. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to break him. And it wouldn't be the last. But what they never understood, what they always underestimated, was that Andre Miller had been carrying bigger burdens for a long, long time. A woman yelling on a train? That was nothing. He had survived being overlooked, underestimated, overworked, underpaid, dismissed, disrespected, and still found a way to hold his head high. He had survived the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, the kind of silence that ate at your dignity if you let it. He had learned not to let it. Andre knew who he was, knew that real power didn't come from shouting the loudest or pushing the hardest. Real power was knowing you didn't have to move, even when the world demanded you make yourself smaller. And on that ordinary morning, in that ordinary subway car, Andre Miller stayed exactly where he was. Unbothered, unmoved, unbroken. The city had its own way of swallowing people whole. Andre Miller knew that better than most. It wasn't a dramatic thing, no flashing lights, no sirens. Just a slow, grinding erosion. 1,000 little cuts. Forms misplaced. Names mispronounced. Rules that somehow only applied to you. After the subway incident with Heather Grant, Andre thought maybe, just maybe, the day would settle. He wasn't naive, but he wasn't bitter either. He stepped off at 23rd Street, bag slung over one shoulder, boots scuffing the worn concrete as he made his way to the security office at Jefferson Arts Museum. The building itself was a relic, all stone and marble and grand promises from another century. Inside, the walls smelled faintly of old books and polished brass. The kind of place that wore history like a badge, but only a certain kind of history. Andre had worked here almost 2 years now. Security wasn't glamorous. Mostly it meant standing for long hours under too bright lights, keeping tourists from leaning on statues, answering dumb questions about where the bathrooms were. But it was honest, and it was his. He pushed open the staff entrance door and clocked in, the machine spitting out a time card with an indifferent whir. Behind the reception desk sat Natalie, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. She didn't even look up when she said, "Mr. Carter wants to see you before you start your shift." Andre frowned slightly. Not fear, just the automatic tightening of muscles you learn after too many meetings that aren't really meetings. He nodded once. "Thanks." Natalie still didn't look up. Mr. Carter's office was on the second floor, tucked behind a frosted glass door that still bore the fading letters. Director of Security. Andre knocked once, sharp and polite. "Yeah." A rough voice barked from inside. He pushed the door open. Carter was a wiry man with slicked back, gray hair, and the kind of tight smile that never quite reached his eyes. He didn't offer a seat. Andre stayed standing. "Look," Carter started, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "We had a complaint come in this morning." Andre said nothing. Waited. "Some woman, Heather Grant, says you were aggressive toward her on the train. She recognized your uniform." Carter leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Said you made her feel threatened and unsafe. Said she's considering legal action." Andre let the words settle. Slow, measured, and then very quietly. "I didn't move when she told me to." Carter snorted. "Doesn't matter, Miller. Perception is reality." Andre didn't flinch, didn't argue. He just stood there, letting the silence stretch until Carter shifted, uncomfortable. "You know how this works," Carter said finally, sighing like he was doing Andre a favor. "I gotta write you up. Suspension. 1 week. Unpaid." There it was. The system didn't need you to do something wrong. It only needed someone to say you had. No evidence. No investigation. Just an accusation and a pile of assumptions ready to fall on your head. Andre nodded once, slow and deliberate. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Carter handed him a clipboard. "Sign here." Andre took the pen, paused, stared at the paper. There was a box next to employee response. Small, almost an afterthought. Most people left it blank. Nobody thought it mattered. Andre filled it carefully, the pen scratching across the cheap paper. Denied wrongdoing. Sat in assigned public space. No verbal escalation initiated. Clean. Precise. No emotion. He slid the clipboard back across the desk. Carter barely glanced at it. "You can clock out now." Andre turned to go. At the door, he hesitated just for a second. Then he said, without looking back, "You ever wonder why certain complaints stick faster than others?" Carter didn't answer. Didn't have to. Andre didn't wait for permission. He left. Outside, the city fell heavier. Suspended for a week. Unpaid. Andre calculated silently. Rent, groceries, his mother's medicine back home. The system wasn't just punishing him. It was gambling he wouldn't fight back. It was daring him to crumble. He walked 6 blocks to the library, a place most people forgot still existed. Inside, it smelled like paper and dust and the faint breath of old air conditioners. Comforting. He sat at one of the public terminals and pulled up the museum's employee handbook. Policy after policy scrolled by, vague language designed to protect the institution, not the people who worked for it. But Andre didn't skim. He read every line. And he started to find things. Small things. Important things, like the clause that said no disciplinary action may be taken without prior review of security footage if available, and the clause that said employees have the right to request union representation at any investigatory interview. And most interesting of all, the clause that said complaints related to off-site behavior must be substantiated through an independent review if the behavior could impact museum reputation. Heather Grant's complaint, filed by phone. No footage, no witnesses, no review. Violation after violation. Andre leaned back in his chair, exhaled through his nose. This wasn't just unfair. It was sloppy. And sloppy systems had seams. Seems he could pull. He spent the next 3 hours drafting a letter. Not angry, not desperate, precise. Addressed to the Human Resources Department, CC'd to the museum board, CC'd to the union rep, even though Andre technically wasn't unionized yet. It didn't matter. Optics mattered. Paper trails mattered. The letter was simple. Chronology of events. Citation of museum policies. Statement of intent to pursue internal review if no response within 5 business days. Not a threat, a promise. By the time he left the library, the sun was setting low and gold over the city. Andre didn't feel angry. He felt clear. There was a difference. Anger burned fast and bright, easy to snuff out. Clarity was slower, more dangerous. It didn't just hurt. It changed things. He took the long way home. Past the park, where kids chased each other under flickering lamplights. Past the bodegas, where old men played chess on milk crates. The world kept turning. The world didn't care if you lost your job or your dignity. You had to care. You had to hold your own line, even when nobody else would. In his apartment, Andre dropped his bag by the door and sank onto the couch. The springs groaned under him, familiar. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. No music, no television, just the sound of his own breathing. He thought about Heather Grant, about people like her, and how easy it was for them to weaponize words they barely understood. He thought about Carter, about men who thought fairness was optional if the paperwork said otherwise. And he thought about every small decision he had ever made to stay standing when it would have been easier to fold. Andre Miller was tired, but he wasn't broken, not even close. They thought they could erase him with a write-up, with a week off, with a neutral HR file. They thought wrong, because Andre understood something most people didn't. Systems weren't invincible. They were made of people, and people made mistakes. Mistakes he could find, mistakes he could use. And when the moment came, he wouldn't yell, he wouldn't beg. He would simply move forward, steady, unstoppable, through the cracks they left behind. The letter had been sent. Andre Miller knew better than to expect an immediate response. Systems like Jefferson Arts Museum didn't move quickly unless it benefited them. They preferred inertia, preferred the comfortable silence of "we'll get back to you." But Andre had planted a seed, and he was patient. 3 days into his suspension, his phone buzzed. A sterile email from HR. "We are reviewing your case. Please refrain from contacting other staff during this process." No apology, no timeline, just an instruction to be invisible, to disappear quietly and obediently. Andre read it once, then deleted it. He wasn't going to let them script his silence. Instead, he got to work. Every morning, after black coffee and a cold shower, he sat at his battered kitchen table with a yellow notepad. Dates, times, names. He wrote everything. The time Carter had joked about certain kinds of employees causing trouble. The shift swaps he was mysteriously denied without explanation. The museum board event last fall where he'd been instructed to stay out of sight while donors toured. Individually, none of it would make headlines. But together, it painted a pattern. And patterns were powerful. Andre wasn't angry. He was building a record. And he knew something about records. They didn't care who shouted louder. They only cared who showed up with the facts. On the 5th day of suspension, Andre received a call from Luis, an old colleague who still worked night shifts at the museum. Luis sounded nervous. "Man, you didn't hear it from me," he said in a rush, "but Carter's been telling people you're unstable." that you got physical on the subway." Andre gripped the phone tighter. He felt the anger flash, hot and fast, but he didn't let it reach his voice. "Did anyone back him up?" Andre asked, calm. "Nah, bro," Luis said. "Everyone's like, we know Andre. That's not him. But you know how it is. Rumors are like wildfire." Andre thanked him and hung up. Then he sat back in his chair, staring at the cracked ceiling. It wasn't enough to suspend him. They had to stain him, too, had to twist the story, just enough that even if he came back, he'd never be seen the same way. Unstable, dangerous, aggressive. 3 words that could follow a black man longer than any resume. That was the first real line they crossed. Suspension was procedure. Character assassination was personal. And it wasn't just about Heather Grant anymore. It was about Carter. About a system trying to protect itself the only way it knew how, by sacrificing the easy target. Andre understood something, sitting there with the cheap yellow notepad cooling under his palms. They weren't afraid of the incident. They were afraid of the record. They were afraid of what it would look like if a quiet man with facts refused to back down. The next morning, Andre put on his cleanest shirt, the one he usually saved for job interviews, and walked the 6 blocks back to the museum. Not to fight, not to make a scene, to observe, to see who would meet his eyes, to see who would pretend he didn't exist. He stood across the street under a crooked lamppost, grocery bag in one hand like he had just been running errands. He watched staff shuffle in through the employee entrance. Most hurried past without noticing him. But a few, Natalie from the front desk, an older security guard named James, caught his eye, nodded, subtle and quick. Solidarity in a glance. Small, quiet, but real. Andre tucked those glances away like coins in a pocket. He didn't need everyone. He only needed enough. Later that afternoon, Andre received another email. "We are arranging a mediation meeting to discuss the incident. Attendance is mandatory." Attached was a time, 9 a.m., conference room B. The email was signed not just by HR, but also by a new name, Margaret Ellis, compliance officer. Andre smiled, a rare expression on his normally still face. A compliance officer meant someone from outside regular management. It meant paperwork had triggered a higher-level review. The cracks were widening. That night, Andre didn't sleep much. Not because he was afraid, because he was ready. There was a difference. He printed copies of his timeline, made a list of museum policies, packed everything into a neat folder labeled simply Records. At the bottom of the folder, he placed a single printed sentence circled in red. Employees accused of misconduct retain the right to access evidence presented against them prior to disciplinary action. He wasn't walking into that meeting alone. He was walking in with the truth. The next morning, the city was wrapped in a cold fog. Breath hung in the air like smoke. Andre walked into Jefferson Arts Museum with his head high. Security didn't stop him. Nobody whispered at him. But the tension was there, clinging to the walls, buzzing under the polished marble floors. He made his way to conference room B. Inside, Carter sat stiffly at one end of the long table. HR rep in a navy suit beside him. Margaret Ellis, middle-aged, glasses perched on the edge of her nose, flipping through a clipboard. Andre sat down opposite them, placed his folder carefully on the table. No rush, no noise, presence. Margaret looked up. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Miller," she said, voice neutral but not unkind. Andre nodded once. Margaret adjusted her glasses. "Before we proceed, Mr. Miller, are you aware of your rights under the employee handbook regarding disciplinary evidence?" Andre opened his folder, slid the circled sentence across the table, slow and deliberate. Carter's face twitched. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Then she turned to the HR rep. "Have we provided Mr. Miller with a copy of the evidence supporting his suspension?" Silence. The HR rep flipped through her notes, cleared her throat. "No, not yet." Margaret leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Then this meeting cannot proceed." For a long moment, nobody moved. Andre sat perfectly still. Not triumphant, not smug, just there, unignorable. Carter opened his mouth, closed it. Margaret turned to Andre. "You'll receive the full file within 48 hours. After that, you have the right to respond formally." Andre nodded. Margaret gathered her papers. Meeting adjourned. Simple as that. Outside, the fog had lifted. The city was still heavy, still imperfect. But as Andre walked back toward the subway, folder under his arm, he felt something shift inside him. Not pride, not relief, something deeper, a certainty. They had crossed a line when they tried to erase him. They thought they could smear his name like graffiti on a wall. They thought he would fold under pressure, retreat into silence. They were wrong, because Andre Miller knew exactly who he was. And now he had the record to prove it. 2 days after the aborted meeting, Andre Miller received a heavy envelope at his door. Hand-delivered. Official. Inside, a thin printout labeled disciplinary evidence, case number 4773. A copy of Heather Grant's complaint form. 3 internal emails between Carter and the HR office. A handwritten sticky note that had accidentally been photocopied onto the back of a memo. Fast-track this one. Don't need another PR mess. Andre read every page twice, then a third time, slower. It was sloppy, unsubstantiated, embarrassing. Even there was no security footage from the train, because none existed. There were no witness statements. There was only a single woman's accusation and Carter's eager scramble to turn it into an HR case. It wasn't a case file. It was a paper trail of fear and favoritism. Andre didn't celebrate. He didn't allow himself the luxury. Not yet. Instead, he printed 2 copies of his formal response letter, cross-referenced against museum policy, and slid them neatly into a black leather portfolio. The next day, he put on his oldest, cleanest boots, pressed his shirt, so sharp you could slice fruit with the crease, and walked back into Jefferson Arts Museum. Not through the employee entrance, through the front doors, through the marble columns, past the security checkpoint where James, the senior guard, caught his eye and gave the faintest nod. Andre nodded back, once. He didn't go to the security office. He didn't go to HR. He went to the administrative wing, the part of the museum usually reserved for board members, directors, and donors. He walked straight up to the receptionist, a young woman with a headset and nervous hands. "I'm here to see Margaret Ellis," Andre said calmly, portfolio tucked under one arm. The receptionist blinked, typed quickly. "Do you have an appointment?" Andre smiled, not wide, not warm, just enough to show he wasn't asking. "She'll want to see me." The woman hesitated. Then, something in Andre's posture, something still and certain, made her pick up the phone. 15 minutes later, Margaret Ellis herself appeared. No security escort, no fake smile, just her. Glasses perched low on her nose, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Miller," she said, cool, professional, but with a flicker of respect beneath it. "Come with me." Andre followed her through the polished halls, past oil portraits of dead founders and velvet ropes guarding relics of another era. They entered a small boardroom. No Carter, no HR manager, just Margaret, a compliance assistant, and a digital recorder sitting in the center of the table. Margaret gestured for him to sit. Andre placed his portfolio on the table, unzipped it slowly, laid out the documents like a dealer laying cards. No grandstanding, just facts. The meeting lasted almost an hour. Margaret asked careful, methodical questions. Had Andre been notified of his right to evidence access before suspension? No. Was there security footage supporting the complaint? No. Had proper protocol been followed for off-site incidents? No. Was there any previous disciplinary action against him? None. Each answer stripped another layer off the flimsy case they had built against him. Each answer made Carter's judgment and HR's complicity more impossible to defend. At the end, Margaret turned off the recorder. She leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the table. "I appreciate your patience, Mr. Miller," she said. Her voice was softer now, less official, more human. "We'll be escalating this to a formal board review. In the meantime, you are to be reinstated with full pay for the suspension period. Andre met her gaze evenly. Reinstated, he said quietly. I wasn't the one who left. Margaret held his look for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly. There will be changes, she said simply. Not a promise. A warning, but not aimed at him. Andre left the museum by the front entrance, the winter sun sharp against the stone steps. He didn't rush, didn't celebrate. He just walked, down the steps, across the plaza, past the vendors selling hot pretzels and postcards. His shoulders back, his pace steady. He wasn't just a man walking out of a building. He was walking through a door they never expected would be opened. A door built on policy, paper, and their own carelessness. A door they thought was locked because they thought no one like him would ever have the patience, the precision, or the presence to walk through it. They were wrong. That afternoon, an internal memo circulated quietly through Jefferson Arts Museum. Effective immediately, any disciplinary action must be reviewed and approved by the compliance office prior to implementation. No names mentioned, no public apology. But inside the staff rooms, the message was clear. Someone had forced a shift. James caught Andre outside the building later that evening. A rare, wide grin splitting his usually reserved face. Man, he said, clapping Andre on the shoulder, whatever you did, it worked. Andre shrugged, small and deliberate. Just followed the rules, he said. James laughed. Sometimes that's the most dangerous thing you can do. Andre smiled, for real this time, because he knew James was right. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been told to move without reason, to stay quiet to keep their paycheck, to take the hit and call it professionalism. Andre hadn't shattered the system. He hadn't made headlines. He hadn't thrown a chair or led a march. He had just stayed. He had just stood. He had just refused to be erased. And sometimes, that was enough to crack the whole damn wall. Later, alone in his apartment, Andre sat on his faded blue couch, a mug of lukewarm coffee cooling in his hands. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt something better. He felt real. Still here. Still standing. Still him. No memo could erase that. No false accusation could unbuild it. No system could survive long against a man who understood exactly how much he was worth and exactly how much he refused to lose. And somewhere deep in the marble bones of the museum, the system shivered. Not loudly, not publicly, just a small hairline crack. The kind that grows, the kind you can't plaster over forever. 2 days after the memo dropped, Carter summoned Andre to his office. The message came through a terse email, no greeting, no signature. See me at 3 p.m. Conference room C. Not in Carter's usual corner office. Conference room C. Neutral ground. That alone told Andre everything he needed to know. At 2:55 p.m., Andre walked down the long corridor lined with grim portraits of the museum's founders. He didn't rehearse anything. He didn't need to. He carried the truth with him and the record. It was enough. He opened the door to conference room C without knocking. Inside, Carter was already seated, arms folded, jaw tight, eyes darting to the folder Andre carried. Margaret Ellis sat at the far end of the table, a silent referee, not interfering, not assisting, just watching. Andre took his seat without invitation, placed his black leather folder carefully on the table. Didn't open it. Didn't have to. Carter cleared his throat, the sound brittle. Andre, I just wanted to clear the air, he began, forced casualness dripping from every word. This whole thing, it got out of hand. Andre said nothing. Let the silence breathe. Let Carter squirm. Carter leaned forward, hands splayed on the table. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he said, voice tightening. You know how it is. HR overreacts. We get bad press, we all look bad. Andre finally spoke. One word. We. Carter blinked. Andre's voice was low, even. I wasn't the one who fast-tracked an unverified complaint to disciplinary action without review. He slid the folder forward, just enough for Carter to see the bold red highlights, marking the policy violations. Margaret shifted slightly, crossing one leg over the other. Still silent. still watching. Carter's face flushed. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to excuse, but Andre cut him off the smallest shake of the head. "You filed false reports," Andre said quietly. "You bypassed due process." Each word was measured, precise. "You attempted to damage my professional record based on a rumor." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "And now, there's a permanent record of your actions." Carter's hand twitched, almost a flinch. Margaret's pen tapped once against her clipboard. Andre didn't raise his voice, didn't change his tone. He didn't need to, because he wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't negotiating. He was stating facts, and facts didn't beg. Carter tried to regroup. "We can find a way to move past this," he said, voice oily. "I can reassign you, give you lighter shifts, maybe even a bump in pay." Andre almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he said, "I'm not looking for favors." He placed another document on the table. A typed memorandum, standard format, cold and clinical. Formal request for internal reassignment of supervisory staff pending investigation. It was signed by Margaret Ellis. Effective immediately. Carter's eyes flicked down to the paper. "Back up. You went over my head," he said, incredulous. Andre just looked at him. Not smug, not triumphant, just steady, unbothered. "Protocol," Andre said simply. Margaret finally spoke, her voice smooth and unimpressed. "Mr. Carter, given the procedural violations documented, you'll be reassigned to administrative duties pending board review." Carter opened his mouth to protest and closed it again. He understood. Too late, but he understood. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the case file. Andre stood slowly, gathered his folder, slid it under his arm. "Anything else?" he asked, voice still polite. Carter just sat there, deflated, small. Andre gave a single nod to Margaret, not to Carter, and left the room without another word. Outside the conference room, the air felt lighter, cleaner. James leaned casually against the far wall, pretending to study a maintenance report. When Andre passed, James said under his breath, "Took you long enough." Andre just smiled. Not wide, not for show, just real. The next few days were a quiet unraveling. Carter was removed from all direct supervisory duties. A new interim director, a woman named Sharonda Patel, was installed. The atmosphere inside Jefferson Arts Museum shifted. Not loudly, not instantly, but surely. People who had once rolled their eyes at Andre's carefulness, his insistence on reading every policy, logging every shift note, began to mirror him. Started asking for things in writing, started requesting clarifications on procedures, started noticing who spoke loudly in meetings and who documented things quietly afterward. Andre didn't become a hero, didn't want to. He became something more dangerous, a standard, the baseline that others now measured against. If Andre could stand his ground, so could they. If Andre could survive the pressure, so could they. If Andre could make the system acknowledge him, maybe, just maybe, it could happen for others too. A week later, Margaret called Andre into her office. Not the cold conference room this time. An actual office. Window cracked open. A small fern dying in a chipped pot on the sill. Human. She gestured for him to sit. "I want to thank you," she said, without the corporate polish this time. Andre shook his head. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just fix it." Margaret smiled, a real one this time. "We're working on it." Then she handed him an envelope. Inside, a formal apology letter from the board. Notification of full reinstatement with back pay. An invitation to participate in the new Workplace Fairness Committee. Andre studied the papers for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll join the committee." Margaret nodded. Good. Because Andre knew. Change didn't happen because you caught one man lying. It happened because you stayed. Stayed when it was easier to leave. Stayed when it was uncomfortable. Stayed until you weren't just surviving, you were building. Later that evening, Andre stood outside the museum, watching the last of the sunlight skim off the stone facade. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't tired. He was something else. Certain. They had tried to erase him, tried to smear him, tried to break him, but instead, they had proven his presence. They had turned their system into his evidence, and now he didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't have to demand respect. He was the record, the proof they couldn't edit away, the door they couldn't close, the story they couldn't control anymore. It started small, like most cracks do. Quiet, hairline thin, easy to miss if you weren't looking. A week after Carter's reassignment, Andre noticed a shift at the morning briefing. Not loud, not dramatic, just different. For the first time, the guards weren't staring at the floor when management spoke. They looked up, met eyes, listened, and were listening back. James was the first, an old-school security guard who had worked in the museum longer than some of the exhibits had been hanging. Everyone liked James, but everyone knew he kept his head down. Until now, they were wrapping up shift assignments when James cleared his throat, loud enough to make the room pause. "I got a question," he said, his voice carrying to the back. The new interim supervisor, Ms. Patel, looked up from her clipboard. "Yes, James." James crossed his arms, casual, but there was an edge under it. If someone files a complaint about a guard, is there a new policy for how that's handled? The room held its breath. Ms. Patel didn't dodge. She nodded once. All complaints now go through independent review. No immediate suspensions without evidence. A low ripple moved through the guards. James caught Andre's eye across the room. A flicker of a smile. Small, private, real. Later that afternoon, Andre found a note slipped into his locker. No name on it, just a few words, hastily scrawled. "Thank you for not folding. Some of us were watching." He tucked it into his pocket without a word. Didn't even know who wrote it. It wasn't about credit. It was about something breaking loose. Something that had been stuck, silent, pressed down for too long. And now it was moving. It spread faster than anyone could have predicted. 2 interns from the museum's diversity program filed quiet reports about inconsistent mentoring practices in their departments. Translation: certain supervisors mentored some and iced out others. A night janitor named Raul, who barely spoke above a whisper, usually submitted a list of safety violations he had been told to stop whining about for months. An administrative assistant, Aisha, finally emailed HR about the way a senior donor coordinator talked down to her in front of patrons, always using the word sweetheart instead of her name. None of it was screaming. None of it was protests. It was quieter than that. More dangerous. Paper trails, testimonies, screenshots, 1,000 small lights in the dark, flickering to life. Margaret Ellis started calling meetings, private ones, behind closed doors, clipboard always in hand. The system was trying to triage, trying to plug holes faster than they opened. But it was too late, because it wasn't just about Andre anymore. It never had been, really. He was just the first crack that showed the rot beneath the paint. Now everyone could see it. Andre kept working, kept showing up on time, kept doing his rounds, checking the fire exits, smiling politely at the visitors. He didn't strut. He didn't gloat. He just was. Present. Solid. Proof that you didn't have to blow up a building to bring a system to its knees. Sometimes you just had to survive it long enough for others to realize they could too. 2 weeks later, there was a formal announcement. The museum will undergo an independent third-party audit of its internal practices and employee complaint procedures. It came down via mass email. No fanfare, no apology, just fact. And that was enough. Because audits meant reports. Reports meant findings. Findings meant leverage. Andre didn't frame the email, didn't even save it. He just memorized the date. Another small stone in the river he was still moving through. That Friday, after closing, the staff cafeteria was louder than usual. Laughter, chatter, a kind of cautious hope in the air. Andre was sitting alone, sipping bad coffee, when Aisha slid into the seat across from him. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him for a second, chewing her lip. Then, in a voice low enough not to carry, "I was scared, you know?" Andre set his coffee down, met her eyes. "I know," he said simply. She nodded, eyes bright. "But seeing you just showing up, doing your job like nothing could break you. It made me think maybe... She stopped herself, shook her head. Andre didn't push. He didn't need to. She smiled, small but fierce. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, raised his coffee cup slightly in a silent salute. No big speeches, no big promises, just presence. Sometimes that was enough, but not for everyone. Carter wasn't the only one uncomfortable with the new shifts. Others grumbled, the kind of people who had built their power on silence. Supervisors who didn't like the idea of having their emails audited. Managers who realized side comments and favoritism now came with consequences. Andre could feel it, the cold glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered a room. But he didn't flinch, because he knew change didn't ask for permission. Change made itself at home, uninvited, unapologetic, unstoppable. One afternoon, Luis, the warehouse buddy who had first warned Andre, caught him outside during a cigarette break. "Bro, they're shook," he said, grinning, tapping ash off the end of the smoke. Andre raised an eyebrow. Luis leaned in, voice low. "HR's getting flooded. They can't keep up with the reports. People bringing screenshots, call logs, you name it." Andre allowed himself a small smile. Luis clapped him on the back. "You didn't just survive, man. You made it easier for the rest of us to speak." The silence had broken, not shattered with a bang, fractured with 1,000 small truths finally being said aloud. And Andre, the man they had tried to erase, was still standing, not as a savior, not as a hero, just as proof. Proof that a system can ignore one voice, can excuse one injustice, can bury one file. But it can't survive when the silence dies, and it had died here, quietly, irrevocably. That night, Andre walked home under a sky smeared with city lights. No parades, no fanfare, just footsteps on cracked pavement. He stopped by the corner store, grabbed a loaf of bread, a bag of beans. The clerk didn't even look up. Andre smiled. Some things didn't change, but some things, the ones that mattered, already had. Inside the museum, inside the people, inside himself. They thought the silence was their protection. They thought it was their weapon. They never imagined the silence could turn on them, could expose them, could free the very people they tried to keep small. Andre Miller didn't need to shout. He didn't need to protest. He didn't need to burn it all down. He just needed to stay. Stay until the cracks in the silence became the map of a new way forward. And he was still here, still standing, still walking. Proof that survival itself could be a revolution if you stayed long enough for others to see it. Justice didn't come with trumpets. It didn't come with banners or standing ovations. It didn't come with viral videos or headlines. It came on a Tuesday, quiet, unannounced, exactly how Andre Miller preferred it. The Workplace Fairness Committee had been a whisper of an idea when they first offered it to him. A line item on a memo, a footnote at the end of an email. But Andre knew better than to dismiss small things. Small things grew. Small things, tended carefully enough, could crack a system wide open. So he showed up. Every meeting, every session, every single tedious review of museum policies and outdated reporting structures. He showed up, and he listened, because that's where power was. Not in shouting over people, not in out-muscling them, in listening, in remembering, in waiting until the right crack appeared, and then pressing gently until it split. 3 weeks into the committee's existence, an anonymous complaint landed on their desk. A familiar name attached, Heather Grant. Andre recognized it immediately. The same woman who had tried to use him as a prop for her own outrage. The same woman who had set off the chain of events leading to Carter's fall. Apparently, Heather had been reapplying for a consultancy position at the museum, quietly behind the scenes. Some small advisory role for community engagement. The irony wasn't lost on Andre. The complaint alleged that Heather had publicly berated a front desk intern during a museum event. Loudly, aggressively, in front of guests, multiple witnesses, multiple written statements. And worse, apparently Heather had tried to use her connections to Carter before his reassignment to fast-track her hiring, bypassing formal vetting. It was a mess. Ugly. Documented. Andre sat at the committee table, the file open in front of him, the room silent as the weight of the pages settled. Everyone looked around, waiting for someone to say what they were all thinking. Finally, Margaret Ellis spoke. Neutral. Professional. The Fairness Committee has the authority to recommend action, she said. And this, she tapped the file lightly, calls for action. The old Andre, the Andre from before, might have stayed quiet, might have thought, let someone else deal with it. But this Andre knew the cost of silence. He raised his hand, steady and certain. I recommend that Heather Grant's application for consultancy be formally denied, he said, and that her behavior be documented in internal files for any future review. No anger, no vengeance, just policy, procedure, presence. That was real victory, and it was happening, one reckoning at a time. There's no grand finale, no parade, no last confrontation, no moment where someone handed Andre Miller a medal and said, "You did it." Closure, real closure, rarely came gift-wrapped. It came quietly, like the end of a long song you didn't realize you were still listening to. 3 months after Carter's reassignment, 3 months after the internal reform started to stick, Andre found himself back where it all began, the old security locker room. The place still smelled like old sweat and cheap soap. The benches were still dented. The lockers still creaked when you pulled them open. Some things didn't change, but some things, important things, had. He stood there a long moment, staring at his locker. It had a new nameplate now, just Miller. Simple, unassuming. Before all this, his locker had been at the far end, tucked away like an afterthought. Now, it sat closer to the center, not by request, just moved, a small thing. But Andre noticed. He noticed everything now. He reached inside and pulled out the only thing he still kept there, an old museum security cap, faded at the edges from too many summers and too many winters. He turned it over in his hands. Memories pressed against his palms. Not all bad, not all good, but all real. Andre didn't feel victorious. He felt something better. Free. Not free from the museum. Not free from the people inside it. Free from the invisible leash he hadn't even realized was around his throat. The fear that if he stood too tall, someone would remind him he wasn't supposed to. That leash was gone now. Not because someone cut it, because he outgrew it. He placed the cap carefully back inside the locker. Closed the door. Didn't lock it. No need. Some things you didn't have to hold on to with both hands anymore. Some things stayed because you had earned them. On his way out of the staff wing, Andre passed by the small display case near the front desk. A new addition. Inside the glass, a collage of staff photos, security, maintenance, custodial workers, clerks, faces that had been invisible to patrons for decades. Underneath it, a simple plaque, the backbone of Jefferson Arts Museum. Thank you. No names, no speeches, just presence. Finally recognized, Andre paused, not for long, just long enough. He stepped outside into the crisp spring air. The city moved around him, indifferent, relentless. Cars honking, people jostling past, the subway rumbling somewhere deep underground. Same city, same chaos, but Andre had changed. And once you changed, the city couldn't unchange you. No matter how loud it got, no matter how many new storms waited around the next corner. He walked the long way home, past the same bodega where the old men still played dominoes, past the same laundromat where the dryers clanged and thudded like cheap percussion, past the same cracked sidewalks and graffiti-splattered mailboxes. Home, not flashy, not perfect, but his, earned. Inside his apartment, Andre flicked on the light. The place looked the same, the battered couch, the chipped kitchen table, the single-potted plant stubbornly clinging to life in the window, but he felt different moving through it. Lighter, stronger, like the space belonged to a man who had stopped asking permission to exist. He went to the small desk tucked in the corner and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, neatly stacked, copies of the grievance letters he had written, policy handbooks with his careful underlines and notes, the formal apology letter from the board, the anonymous note Natalie had left him. "Thank you for not folding." Andre ran his fingers over the papers. He could have thrown them out by now, could have burned them, buried them, moved on like none of it had happened, but he didn't, because these weren't relics of pain. They were proof that he had been here, had stood, had mattered, even when they tried to make him small, even when they tried to erase him. He closed the drawer, not slammed, not forced, just closed, softly, finally. That night, he made a simple dinner, rice and beans, the same meal he had leaned on during the hard weeks. He ate at the chipped table under the low hum of the kitchen light. No music, no distractions, just the steady sound of his own breathing. The sound of a man at peace with himself, the rarest sound of all. Later, lying on his couch, he stared at the cracked ceiling and thought about everything and nothing at once. Thought about Carter, about Natalie, about Luis, about the ones who stayed silent and the ones who finally spoke. Thought about the cost, not in anger, not in regret, just in honesty, because all change costs something. And sometimes the price was silence you could never get back, trust you could never fully rebuild. But sometimes, just sometimes, the price was worth it. Andre closed his eyes, let the city's noise wash over him. Distant sirens, laughter spilling from open windows, the thrum of invisible trains beneath the streets. Life moving forward, not waiting for him, not needing him to keep up. And for once, that felt okay. In a forgotten drawer at the museum. Maybe someone would one day find the old complaint reports, the HR memos, the committee notes. Maybe they would read them and shrug. Or maybe, if they were paying attention, they would see the pattern, the proof. The quiet revolution that had started because one man stayed when it would have been easier to leave, stayed when it would have been safer to fold, stayed until his presence became undeniable. Andre Miller didn't need a statue, didn't need a nameplate. He had something better, a life still his own, a dignity still intact, a future still unwritten, because he refused to let them write the ending for him. And if you listened closely in the quiet corners of the museum, you could still hear it, the echo of presence, the hum of stubborn survival, the soft, relentless proof of a man they tried to erase and failed. They tried to erase the presence. Instead, it became the proof that wouldn't go away.